Captain Amara Washington's hand trembled as she held the termination notices. Through the glass doors, she watched the 3 employees who'd blocked her from boarding her own flight laughing. They didn't recognize the pilot's uniform she wore. They would soon recognize her authority. Before we dive into this incredible story of justice served, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments below, hit that like button, and subscribe to join our community of truth seekers. Now, let's see how Captain Washington went from being blocked from her own plane to changing an entire airline's culture. The morning sun streamed through the blinds of Amara Washington's apartment as she straightened her captain's hat in the mirror. Her fingers traced the golden wings emblem, a symbol of everything she had fought for. As a first-generation college graduate from South Chicago, the journey to this moment had been anything but easy. Growing up in a modest 2-bedroom apartment, young Amara would spend hours on the rooftop, watching planes take off and land at O'Hare International Airport. She'd trace their paths with her finger against the sky, imagining herself in the cockpit, soaring above the clouds. Her single mother, Denise, would often find her there, sketchbook filled with airplane drawings and calculations about altitude and speed that impressed even her high school physics teacher. One day, Mama, 8-year-old Amara had promised, "I'm gonna fly one of those big planes." Denise Washington had smiled, hiding her worry about the statistical improbability of her black daughter entering an industry dominated by white men. But she never discouraged Amara's dreams. Instead, she picked up extra shifts at the hospital where she worked as a nurse's aide, eventually adding weekend work at a local diner to afford flying lessons for her daughter's 16th birthday. Flight school had been its own battlefield. Amara was the only black woman in her class, facing subtle doubts from instructors who would triple-check her calculations while nodding approvingly at the work of her white counterparts. Comments like, "You're actually pretty good at this," or "You're not what I expected," became routine. Rather than breaking her spirit, these microaggressions only strengthened her resolve. She graduated top of her class. While her classmates received multiple job offers, Amara sent out 73 applications before landing her first position as a flight attendant. It wasn't the cockpit, but it was a foot in the door. She continued her training during every free moment, earning her commercial pilot's license through sheer determination. For 3 years, she worked as a flight attendant by day and studied advanced aeronautics by night. Her break came when a pilot fell ill minutes before a short regional flight, and Amara revealed her qualifications to a desperate flight manager. She completed the route flawlessly, earning her first recommendation. From there, she worked her way up through regional airlines, flying increasingly larger aircraft, building her hours meticulously. 8 years ago, Skylink Airlines hired her as their second black female pilot. Today, at 34, she had just been promoted to captain, the youngest in the company's history. This morning's flight to Atlanta carried special significance. After years of promising her mother the experience, today would be Denise Washington's first time flying with her daughter as captain. The thought brought tears to Amara's eyes as she adjusted her uniform one final time. Her phone rang, her mother's face lighting up the screen. "Morning, Mama," Amara answered, her voice steady despite the emotion building in her chest. "Baby girl, I'm at the terminal already. I couldn't sleep a wink, I'm so excited," Denise's voice carried decades of pride. "My baby, the captain. Your father would have been so proud." Amara swallowed hard at the mention of her father, who had passed away when she was 12. "I know, Mama. I feel him with me in the cockpit sometimes." "You better believe it. That man is watching over every flight you take," Denise assured her. "Now, what gate did you say again?" "I want to be first in line." "Gate A17. "But Mama, you know I can't give you special treatment," Amara laughed. "I don't need special treatment. Just want to see my baby in that uniform before everyone else boards," Denise replied. After hanging up, Amara began her pre-flight routine. Her colleagues called her methodical approach excessive, but her reputation for precision was unmatched. She checked her flight plan 3 times, reviewed weather patterns across the route, and memorized the names of her flight crew. Nothing was left to chance. A notification pinged on her phone, a slight delay due to a routine maintenance check on the aircraft. Not a safety concern, but it would push their departure back by 20 minutes. Amara frowned, calculating the adjusted timeline in her head. She'd need to hurry to make it to the terminal on time. Gathering her belongings, she headed for the airport's employee entrance, a shortcut that would save her precious minutes. As she strode through the corridors in her full captain's uniform, she noticed strange glances from ground staff. It wasn't unusual, despite her credentials, her presence still surprised some colleagues. 8 years at Skylink, and she still wasn't what some people expected a captain to look like. Their double takes had become so common that she barely registered them anymore. Today, however, she felt a strange tension in the air as she approached the employee security checkpoint. Something felt different, and not in a good way. The employee security checkpoint was typically a smooth process for uniformed flight crew. A quick ID verification before proceeding to the terminals. Today, however, 3 customer service agents manned the station: Tyler Reed, a white male supervisor in his mid-40s with a perpetual scowl, Brandy Cooper, a blonde white woman in her 30s who was scrolling through her phone, and Jake Simmons, a young white man barely in his 20s who appeared to be in training. Amara approached the checkpoint slightly out of breath from her brisk pace. She pulled out her employee ID and captain's credentials in one practiced motion. "Good morning. Captain Amara Washington, Flight 2187 to Atlanta." Running a bit behind due to maintenance checks, she explained professionally, sliding her identification across the counter. Tyler picked up her ID with obvious reluctance, examining it with exaggerated scrutiny. His eyebrows raised as he glanced between the photo and Amara's face multiple times. "Is there a problem?" Amara asked, checking her watch. The delay was eating into her preparation time. Tyler leaned over to whisper something to Brandy, whose eyes widened before she let out a short, disbelieving laugh. "You're saying you're the captain?" Brandy asked, making no effort to hide her skepticism. "Yes, I am," Amara replied evenly, pointing to her credentials and the captain's stripes clearly visible on her uniform. "Flight 2187 to Atlanta. I need to get to my gate." Jake moved to stand in front of the doorway, arms crossed. "You'll need to wait outside until we verify this," he said, nodding toward the general waiting area. Amara took a deep breath, maintaining her composure. "I've used this entrance countless times. I'm already delayed due to a maintenance check. My flight boards in 30 minutes. Policy states all verification must be complete before proceeding," Tyler stated flatly, picking up the phone. "This shouldn't take long if everything's in order." As Tyler made his call, Amara noticed he was deliberately providing incorrect information. "Yes, I have someone claiming to be Captain Washington." "No, I've never seen her before." "Yes, verification needed." A small crowd of airline employees had begun to gather, watching the scene unfold. The whispers were audible enough for Amara to catch fragments. "What's the holdup? Never seen her before. Is there a security issue?" The situation became even more apparent when another pilot, a white man in his 50s, approached the checkpoint. Tyler nodded respectfully, barely glancing at his ID before waving him through. The contrast was stark and unmistakable. "Excuse me," Amara said firmly, her patience wearing thin. "I've been a captain with Skylink for years. My credentials are valid. There's no legitimate reason to delay me." Tyler returned his attention to her with a cold smile. "Ma'am, captains don't typically use this entrance. Policy states you must wait outside until proper verification can be completed." Amara knew with absolute certainty that no such policy existed. She had used this exact entrance 3 days ago without incident. The fabricated rule was transparent in its purpose. "That's simply not true," she stated. "I've used this entrance regularly throughout my 8 years with Skylink. Please stop delaying me and let me proceed to my gate." Brandy rolled her eyes. Maybe you should have arrived earlier if time was a concern, she remarked, just loud enough for everyone to hear. The tension in Amara's shoulders built as she calculated her options. Making a scene would only reinforce negative stereotypes about angry black women. Accepting the discrimination meant missing her flight, the special flight with her mother on board. From the corner of her eye, she noticed Howard Jackson, a black security officer she'd known for years, approaching with a concerned expression. He had witnessed similar situations before. "Everything all right here?" Howard asked, his deep voice carrying authority despite his deliberately casual tone. "Just following procedures," Tyler replied tersely. "ID verification for this individual." Howard glanced at Amara's uniform and credentials, recognition immediate in his eyes. "Captain Washington? Is there an issue with her credentials?" "We're just being thorough," Tyler insisted, his demeanor shifting slightly under Howard's steady gaze. "Captain Washington flies through here regularly," Howard noted. "I've personally verified her credentials dozens of times." The clock on the wall showed that precious minutes had ticked by. If this continued much longer, her flight would be delayed, an unacceptable mark on her perfect record, especially today with her mother on board. "Officer Jackson, I appreciate your assistance," Amara said carefully. "But I need to get to my gate immediately. My flight boards soon." Howard nodded, understanding the complexity of the situation. "Tyler, I can vouch for Captain Washington. She's one of our most respected pilots." The standoff continued for another tense moment before Tyler reluctantly stepped aside, but not without a final power play. "Fine, but I'll need to file an incident report about this irregular access attempt." As Amara finally moved toward the door, Brandy muttered under her breath, just loud enough to be heard, "That's what happens when diversity hiring takes priority over qualifications." Amara pretended not to hear, but the words burned in her ears as she hurried toward the terminal, her heart racing not from physical exertion but from the familiar sting of discrimination that never seemed to fade no matter how high she climbed. Howard's intervention had gotten Amara through the checkpoint, but Tyler wasn't finished asserting his perceived authority. He deliberately took his time processing her paperwork, checking and rechecking items that never required verification for other pilots. "Just one more signature needed," he said with artificial politeness, sliding yet another form across the counter after Amara had already signed 3 others. "This isn't standard procedure," Amara stated firmly. "Just being thorough, Captain," Tyler replied, emphasizing her title with subtle mockery. Finally cleared, Amara hurried through the corridor toward the main terminal, her composed exterior masking the turmoil within. 20 years of aviation experience had taught her to compartmentalize emotions during crisis situations, a skill now serving her well outside the cockpit. When she reached the gate area, First Officer Michael Dawson was already there, reviewing flight plans with a concerned expression. "Captain Washington, everything okay?" he asked, noticing her slightly flushed appearance. "Minor delay at security," she replied professionally, not wanting to burden him with the details. "Let's review the flight plan updates." As they discussed the route, Amara caught sight of her mother in the boarding area, dressed in her Sunday best, beaming with pride as she chatted with other passengers. The sight simultaneously warmed her heart and strengthened her resolve not to let what happened affect this special day. Zara Thompson, the lead flight attendant for today's flight, approached with the passenger manifest. Unlike many colleagues, Zara had always treated Amara with genuine respect rather than forced tolerance. "Captain, you look a bit shaken. Is everything all right?" Zara whispered, her expression conveying sincere concern. "I'll tell you later," Amara promised. "Let's focus on giving these passengers a perfect flight." As boarding began, Amara stood at the gate entrance, greeting passengers with a professional smile that betrayed none of the morning's turbulence. Most responded with respect, some with surprise, and a few with poorly concealed skepticism. One middle-aged businessman did a double take, then asked the gate agent, "Is she really qualified to fly this thing?" The question wasn't directed at Amara, but she heard it clearly, as did Zara, whose expression hardened instantly. Captain Washington has over 10,000 flight hours and an impeccable safety record, Zara informed him coldly. You're in the most capable hands in the industry. The man muttered something inaudible but proceeded to board. As Amara settled into the captain's seat, memories of similar incidents throughout her career flashed through her mind, the flight instructor who suggested she consider being a flight attendant instead, the passengers who requested a different pilot upon seeing her. The colleagues who attributed her promotions to diversity quotas rather than her exceptional performance. Each incident had built her resilience, but also reinforced the exhausting reality that she constantly needed to prove herself in ways her white male counterparts never did. Despite the emotional weight, Amara completed her pre-flight checks with laser focus. The checklist grounded her, each item ticked off a reminder of her competence and rightful place in the cockpit. The takeoff was textbook perfect, smooth, precise, exactly as she'd executed hundreds of times before. Once they reached cruising altitude and engaged the autopilot, Michael turned to her. "So what really happened at security?" he asked. "You're never late for briefing." Amara hesitated, then decided that transparency with her flight crew was important. She described the encounter with Tyler, Brandy, and Jake in measured terms, downplaying the emotional impact but conveying the facts. Michael's expression shifted from confusion to outrage. "That's completely unacceptable. You should report them. That's textbook discrimination." "It wouldn't be the first report," Amara replied, a hint of weariness creeping into her voice. "Doesn't matter. Every incident needs documentation. The pattern is what eventually forces action," Michael insisted. Amara nodded, knowing he was right in principle. But experience had taught her that documentation often led nowhere except to her being labeled difficult or oversensitive. "I'll consider it," she said, turning her attention back to the controls. During a quiet moment in the flight, Amara walked through the cabin to check on passengers and found her mother beaming with pride in seat 7A. "How's the view, Mama?" she asked, crouching beside her seat. "Better than I ever imagined," Denise replied, eyes glistening with tears. "Your father is looking down right now, bursting with pride." Amara squeezed her mother's hand, drawing strength from the woman who had never stopped believing in her. "Captain," Zara approached discreetly, "would you like me to take a photo of you and your mother?" The small gesture of kindness, recognizing the significance of this flight, nearly broke Amara's carefully maintained composure. She nodded gratefully. As Zara snapped the photo, Amara realized that for every Tyler, Brandy, and Jake she encountered, there were also allies like Howard, Michael, and Zara. The realization didn't erase the sting of discrimination, but it provided a counterbalance, a reminder that change was possible, even if it came slowly. Returning to the cockpit, Amara found renewed determination. Today's incident wouldn't be brushed aside like so many before it. This time would be different, though she wasn't yet sure how. As Amara monitored the aircraft systems at cruising altitude, her mind returned to the meeting that had taken place just 2 weeks ago. A meeting whose significance would soon send shockwaves through Skylink Airlines. Julia Hernandez, the company's CEO, had called Amara into her office without explanation. Walking into the executive suite had been intimidating. It wasn't a space where pilots typically ventured. Captain Washington, Julia had greeted her warmly, rising from behind an imposing desk. "Thank you for coming on such short notice." "Of course, Ms. Hernandez," Amara had replied, maintaining professional formality despite her curiosity. Julia had gestured toward a chair. "Please, sit. And call me Julia. What I'm about to discuss requires us to speak candidly." For the next hour, Julia had shared her vision for Skylink's future, a future that prominently featured Amara Washington. "Your performance record is unmatched," Julia had explained, sliding a folder across the desk. "Perfect safety ratings. Impeccable fuel efficiency. Consistently positive crew evaluations. But more impressively, you've achieved this excellence while navigating barriers that shouldn't exist in modern aviation." Amara had remained silent, unsure where the conversation was heading. I'm appointing you as our new chief of pilot operations, Julia had stated plainly. The announcement will be made in 2 weeks. Until then, I'd like you to conduct unannounced visits to our various hubs, evaluating operations from the ground up. The revelation had left Amara momentarily speechless. Chief of Pilot Operations, the position would place her in authority over every pilot in the company, responsible for training protocols, scheduling, and operational standards. It was a role traditionally held by white men with military backgrounds. Why me? Amara had finally asked. Because excellence should be rewarded regardless of race or gender, Julia had replied. And because systemic change requires new perspectives in leadership positions. Today's flight to Atlanta was meant to be Amara's final evaluation before officially assuming her new role tomorrow. The confrontation at the security checkpoint now took on additional significance. It would become her first test case as chief of operations. The irony wasn't lost on her. The very people who had tried to block her from boarding didn't realize they had discriminated against their new boss. Looking across at Michael, who was carefully monitoring their flight path, Amara considered sharing this information. But the announcement wasn't official yet, and she preferred to let the news come through proper channels. More significantly, she hadn't even told her mother about the promotion. She had planned to surprise Denise after today's flight, taking her to dinner to celebrate both the successful flight and the new position. A gentle chime from the communications system interrupted her thoughts. It was Zara. Captain, your mother is asking if she could visit the cockpit briefly when it's convenient. Amara smiled. Of course. Give us 5 minutes. When Denise Washington entered the cockpit, her eyes widened with childlike wonder at the array of instruments and the panoramic view of clouds stretching toward the horizon. Mama, this is First Officer Michael Dawson, Amara introduced them. Michael, this is my mother, Denise Washington. Ma'am, it's an honor, Michael said warmly. Your daughter is the finest pilot I've ever flown with. I've known that since she was building paper airplanes in our kitchen, Denise replied proudly. After Michael excused himself to give them privacy, Denise took his seat temporarily, absorbing the view with visible emotion. I never imagined this when you were that little girl watching planes from our rooftop, she said softly. You made it possible, Mama, Amara replied. All those extra shifts, all those sacrifices. Denise shook her head. I just opened doors. You walked through them, even when people tried to block your way. The comment hit closer to home than her mother could know. Speaking of which, Denise continued, her tone shifting, I've been meaning to tell you about something that happened at the hospital last month. She described an incident where a patient had refused to let her administer medication, demanding a real nurse, code for a white nurse. The new hospital director, a young black woman like yourself, happened to be doing rounds, Denise explained. Instead of just sending in a white nurse like the previous director would have done, she came in herself, explained that I was the most experienced nurse on the floor, and gave the patient a choice, accept excellent care from me or transfer to another hospital. What happened? Amara asked. He stayed. And by the end of his stay, he was specifically requesting me, Denise said with quiet satisfaction. Sometimes people need to be confronted with their own biases by someone with authority. Amara nodded thoughtfully. The system doesn't change if we just work around the problem. As her mother returned to her seat, Amara's phone vibrated with a text message from Julia, ready for tomorrow's announcement. Staring at the message, Amara made her decision. She typed back, yes, but we need to talk about an incident first. Have you ever faced discrimination in your workplace? Comment number 1 if you believe Amara should use her new authority to address systemic issues rather than just punishing the individuals involved. Hit like if you think workplace discrimination should always be confronted directly, and subscribe to support stories that highlight these important issues. Now, what do you think will happen when Amara begins her investigation? Will the airline stand behind her, or will she face even more resistance? 2 days after the Atlanta flight, Amara sat in her new office at Skylink's Chicago headquarters. The nameplate on the door still read Chief of Pilot Operations, but a temporary sticky note with her name had been added below it. The official ceremony would happen later that afternoon, but Amara had arrived early with a specific purpose. On her desk lay 3 folders. The first contained printed screenshots from the security camera footage at the employee checkpoint, clearly showing the confrontation with Tyler, Brandy, and Jake. The second held her formal incident report, meticulously detailing the event with timestamps and direct quotes. The third, and most concerning, contained information Howard had quietly provided, previous complaints against the same 3 employees that had apparently vanished into administrative limbo. A knock at the door interrupted her review. "Come in," she called. Thomas Wilson, the Human Resources Director, entered with a practiced smile. Tall, gray-haired, and perpetually dressed in expensive suits, Thomas had been with the company for over 20 years. "Captain Washington, or should I say Chief Washington now," he greeted her with forced joviality. "Congratulations on the promotion. Julia speaks very highly of you." "Thank you, Thomas," Amara replied evenly. "Please, have a seat. I appreciate you coming on such short notice." Thomas settled into the chair across from her desk, his expression curious but relaxed. "Of course. How can HR support our new Chief of Operations?" Amara slid the first folder across the desk. "I'd like to discuss an incident that occurred 2 days ago." Thomas opened the folder, his expression changing subtly as he recognized the security checkpoint photos. "Ah, I did see a notification about some confusion at security. Nothing serious, I hope." "It was considerably more than confusion," Amara stated firmly. "It was a clear case of racial discrimination by 3 of your customer service employees." Thomas's smile tightened. "That's a very serious allegation, Captain. Are you certain this wasn't just a misunderstanding about protocols?" "There was no misunderstanding," Amara replied, opening her incident report. "I was deliberately delayed, questioned, and humiliated despite presenting proper identification and being in full uniform. Meanwhile, a white male pilot was waved through without scrutiny." She slid the security footage stills across the desk, pointing to specific timestamps. "The evidence is quite clear." Thomas reviewed the images with a furrowed brow. "This is unfortunate, certainly, but isolated incidents." "It wasn't isolated," Amara interrupted, opening the third folder. "These are 12 similar complaints filed against these same employees over the past 18 months. All from minority staff members. All mysteriously unresolved." Thomas's composure faltered momentarily. "Where did you get these?" "That's not relevant," Amara replied. "What's relevant is that they exist and were never properly addressed." She pulled out another document, a statistical analysis of employee complaints and resolutions. "Furthermore, complaints filed by white employees are resolved at a rate of 89%, while complaints from minority employees stall at 34%. That suggests a systemic problem, wouldn't you agree?" Thomas cleared his throat, buying time to compose a response. "Statistics can be misleading without proper context." "I've provided context," Amara countered. 12 specific complaints against the same employees, all buried. "That's not statistics, that's a pattern." A tense silence filled the office as Thomas seemed to recalculate his approach. "Captain Washington," he finally said, his tone conciliatory, "I understand you're upset about what happened, and rightly so. But as you begin your new role, might I suggest focusing on pilot operations rather than diving into HR matters? We can certainly issue a reprimand to these employees." "A reprimand?" Amara repeated, her tone measured but firm. "Thomas, would you consider a reprimand appropriate if these employees had violated safety protocols? Because creating a hostile work environment for minority staff is a safety issue. It affects performance, communication, and ultimately, passenger safety." Before Thomas could respond, there was another knock at the door. Julia Hernandez entered, her expression making it clear she had overheard at least part of the conversation. Thomas, Captain Washington, she acknowledged them both. I was hoping to catch you before the ceremony. Is everything all right? Thomas shifted uncomfortably. Just discussing a minor security incident. It wasn't minor, Amara interjected, her gaze steady on Julia. And as the new chief of operations, I can't in good conscience begin my tenure without addressing it properly. She handed the folders to Julia, who reviewed them with growing concern. These previous complaints, Julia noted. Why wasn't I made aware of them? Thomas spread his hands. Many complaints come through HR. We handle them based on severity, Anne. 12 similar complaints isn't severe enough? Julia asked sharply. With respect, Thomas replied, his tone hardening, HR procedures are established to handle these matters appropriately. Captain Washington is new to administrative roles and may not fully understand. I understand perfectly, Amara cut in. I understand that discrimination has been systematically ignored within this company. I understand that minority employees have been silenced. And I understand that as Chief of Operations, my responsibility extends to ensuring all flight staff can perform their duties without facing prejudice. Julia studied Amara with newfound respect. What would you recommend? Thomas interjected quickly, Julia, perhaps we should discuss this privately. I'm asking Chief Washington, Julia stated firmly. Amara met her gaze steadily. A full investigation into these 3 employees and the handling of minority complaints generally. Transparent disciplinary action based on the findings. And a comprehensive review of company culture, beginning with mandatory bias training for all supervisory staff. Julia nodded slowly. Proceed with the investigation. You have my full support and authority. Thomas's face flushed with poorly concealed anger. Julia, you can't be serious. This will create unnecessary disruption. Discrimination is the disruption, Thomas, Julia replied coldly. Chief Washington is addressing it. I suggest you cooperate fully. After Julia left, Thomas gathered his papers with stiff movements. You're making a mistake, pursuing this on your first day. There are unwritten rules about how things work here. Those unwritten rules are precisely the problem, Amara replied calmly. As the day progressed, Amara interviewed several employees who had witnessed the incident, including Howard, who provided invaluable testimony about similar occurrences. They do this regularly, he confirmed. Especially Tyler. He seems to take particular pleasure in verifying credentials of minority staff. By evening, Amara had compiled an extensive dossier of evidence. Reviewing employee records revealed another troubling connection. Thomas Wilson and Tyler Reed had been college roommates, which potentially explained why complaints against Tyler consistently disappeared. As she worked late into the night building her case, a notification popped up on her computer. An anonymous reporting system Julia had authorized had received 27 new submissions in just 4 hours, all minority employees sharing similar experiences of discrimination. The pattern was undeniable, the evidence overwhelming. Yet Amara felt a familiar knot of anxiety in her stomach. Would pursuing this make her the angry black woman? Would colleagues see her as playing the race card rather than addressing a legitimate organizational problem? Her mother's words echoed in her mind, sometimes people need to be confronted with their own biases by someone with authority. Amara now had that authority. The question was no longer whether she would use it, but how. The conference room on the executive floor carried an atmosphere of tension so thick it seemed to affect the very air pressure. Amara had deliberately chosen this location, neutral territory, but with the trappings of authority that would set the appropriate tone. Tyler Reed arrived first, his usual scowl firmly in place but tinged with confusion at being summoned to the executive level. Brandy Cooper followed shortly after, nervously adjusting her blazer and hair. Jake Simmons entered last, his youthful face showing none of the concern his colleagues displayed, either from confidence or ignorance. Thomas Wilson was already seated at the far end of the table, documents spread before him, his expression carefully neutral. Does anyone know what this is about? Brandy whispered to Tyler. Tyler shrugged, though his tense posture suggested he had suspicions. Probably just standard review. Nothing to worry about. The door opened again, and Julia Hernandez entered, followed by 2 members of the legal department. The presence of legal counsel immediately shifted the atmosphere from confusion to concern. Good morning, Julia began professionally. Thank you all for coming on short notice. Ms. Hernandez, Tyler acknowledged, sitting straighter. Is there a situation we should be aware of? Indeed there is, Julia replied. But first, let me introduce you to someone. On cue, the door opened once more. Amara entered, not in her pilot's uniform but in a tailored executive suit that signaled her new position unequivocally. The shock on Tyler's face was immediate and unmistakable. Some of you already know Captain Washington, Julia continued. What you may not know is that as of yesterday, she is Skylink's new Chief of Pilot Operations, overseeing all flight staff and operational standards company-wide. Jake's confident expression finally faltered. Brandy's face paled visibly. Captain, Chief Washington has brought a serious matter to my attention, Julia continued, her tone hardening. A matter that affects the integrity of our company culture and potentially our legal standing. Thomas cleared his throat. Perhaps we should frame this as a learning opportunity rather than. Let's start with the facts, Amara interjected calmly, taking control of the meeting. She nodded to one of the legal team members, who distributed copies of her report to everyone present. 2 days ago, I was deliberately blocked from accessing my flight by the 3 of you, she stated, looking directly at Tyler, Brandy, and Jake. Despite presenting proper identification and being in full uniform, you created obstacles that were not applied to white colleagues. Tyler's defensive posture was immediate. I was following security protocols, ensuring. Let's review the security footage before you continue that statement, Amara suggested, nodding to the tech specialist who had quietly set up a laptop and projector. The room fell silent as the video played, clearly showing Tyler's dismissive examination of Amara's credentials, Brandy's disbelieving laugh, and Jake physically blocking the doorway. Most damning was the contrast when a white male pilot approached shortly after and was waved through with barely a glance at his ID. When the lights came back on, Tyler's strategy shifted. This is being taken completely out of context. That other pilot is a regular I recognize. You don't typically use that entrance, so additional verification was prudent. I've used that entrance at least twice weekly for 8 years, Amara corrected him. And the security logs confirm this. Brandy, visibly distressed, suddenly broke. Tyler told us to always double-check non-traditional staff, she blurted. He said it was for security purposes, but he specifically mentioned flight attendants trying to pass as pilots, looking at me when he said it. Brandy. Tyler hissed. It's true, she insisted, tears forming. He gave us a list of red flags to watch for, and they were basically just descriptions of minority employees. Jake, still clinging to defiance, crossed his arms. Look, passengers feel safer with certain types of pilots. That's just reality. We were doing our jobs. Your job is to verify credentials, not make judgments based on race, Amara stated firmly. This is ridiculous, Tyler protested, looking to Thomas for support. A simple misunderstanding is being blown completely out of proportion. Thomas attempted to intervene. Perhaps we can find a middle ground here. A formal apology, some additional training. This isn't an isolated incident, Amara continued, ignoring Thomas's suggestion. She distributed a second document. These are 12 similar complaints against the same 3 employees, all from minority staff, all buried without resolution. The room grew silent as everyone reviewed the pattern of behavior documented over 18 months. Furthermore, Amara continued, our anonymous reporting system has received 27 additional accounts in the past day alone, describing similar discriminatory treatment. Tyler's composure began to crack. This is a witch hunt. You get promoted and immediately target us. That seems convenient. I didn't know about my promotion when you blocked me from my flight, Amara reminded him. I was simply trying to do my job, just like the dozens of other minority employees you've obstructed. Brandy was openly crying now. I didn't mean to, I was just following Tyler's instructions. Jake's defiance finally wavered. We didn't think it was that serious. Just extra security. Discrimination is always serious, Julia stated firmly. Tyler, realizing the gravity of the situation, attempted a new strategy. Look, if there was a misunderstanding, I sincerely apologize. Perhaps some cultural sensitivity training would be beneficial for all of us. This isn't about a misunderstanding or a sensitivity gap, Amara replied, her voice steady but intense. This is about a pattern of deliberate discrimination that has gone unchecked and even been protected. She looked directly at Thomas, whose discomfort was now plainly visible. This isn't about one incident. This is about the culture you've created and enabled. The weight of her words settled over the room like a physical presence. For the first time, Tyler looked genuinely afraid, not just defensive. What happens now? He asked, his voice smaller than before. Julia took over. That will be determined following the completion of our investigation. For now, all three of you are suspended with pay pending final decisions. As the reality of their situation became clear, the three employees' reactions told their own story. Tyler's face hardened with barely suppressed rage. Brandy continued to sob quietly. Jake stared at the table, the consequences of his actions finally registering. You can't do this, Tyler protested weakly. I've been with this company for 15 years. 15 years during which you've consistently undermined our values and violated our anti-discrimination policies, Julia replied coldly. Your tenure doesn't excuse your behavior, it makes it more egregious. As the meeting concluded and the three were escorted out by security, Thomas lingered behind, approaching Amara with forced cordiality. You've made your point, he said quietly. But consider the long-term consequences of pursuing this so aggressively. Some battles aren't worth the casualties. Amara met his gaze steadily. The casualties have already occurred, Thomas. They're the talented minority employees who left this company because they were made to feel unwelcome. They're the potential candidates who never applied because of our reputation. This isn't aggression, it's long overdue correction. As Thomas departed, Julia remained, studying Amara with newfound respect. That went exactly as I expected, Julia noted. You handled it perfectly. This is just the beginning, Amara replied. The problem runs deeper than those three. Julia nodded thoughtfully. I'm starting to see that. The question is, how far are you willing to go to fix it? As far as necessary, Amara answered without hesitation. The next morning, Amara arrived at her office to find a formal notice from the legal department. Tyler Reed had filed a preemptive complaint alleging reverse discrimination and threatening a lawsuit if the disciplinary action proceeded. The move wasn't surprising, but the speed with which it had been coordinated suggested he had received guidance, likely from Thomas or others in senior management who felt threatened by the investigation. As Amara reviewed the complaint, her assistant knocked on the door frame. Chief Washington. IT flagged something you should see. The something was an email chain between Tyler, Brandy, and Jake, planning to contact aviation industry blogs with a distorted version of events, portraying Amara as an unqualified diversity hire pursuing a vendetta against employees who had questioned her credentials. They sent this from company accounts? Amara asked, shocked at their carelessness. Yes, ma'am. And there's more. They've been communicating with several senior staff members who've been offering advice on how to fight the suspension. By mid-morning, the resistance had organized further. 3 board members had received anonymous letters raising concerns about Amara's aggressive approach and divisive agenda on her first day as chief of operations. A knock at her door revealed Thomas Wilson, his expression a careful mask of professional concern. May I come in? he asked, not waiting for an answer before entering and closing the door behind him. What can I do for you, Thomas? Amara asked, maintaining a neutral tone. I've been reviewing the situation, and I believe termination would be excessive, he began, placing a folder on her desk. I've drafted a compromise, a 2-week suspension with mandatory sensitivity training. This preserves everyone's dignity while addressing the issue. Amara opened the folder, scanning its contents. This isn't a matter of sensitivity, Thomas. It's about deliberate discrimination and policy violations. Even so, termination seems disproportionate for a first formal offense, Thomas argued. First documented offense, Amara corrected. The pattern of behavior spans years, as we've established. Thomas leaned forward, his tone shifting from professional to personal. Amara, I'm trying to help you. The board is concerned that this situation is becoming a distraction. Several senior staff have expressed reservations about your priorities. My priority is ensuring that Skylink is a workplace where all employees are treated with equal respect and held to equal standards, Amara replied evenly. That shouldn't be controversial. In theory, no, Thomas conceded. But practically speaking, you're creating waves on your first day. That's not politically wise. I'm not a politician, Thomas. I'm an aviation professional addressing a safety and compliance issue. Thomas sighed, dropping the pretense. Julia is feeling pressure to intervene. Several board members have suggested this is a vendetta rather than a legitimate investigation. Then I'll need to ensure our evidence is irrefutable, Amara replied, unmoved. After Thomas left, Amara sat quietly, contemplating her position. The resistance was organizing faster than she had anticipated. While Julia supported her now, how long would that support last under increasing pressure from the board and senior management? Her phone rang, her mother calling for their daily check-in. How's my big-shot airline executive today? Denise asked cheerfully. Facing some challenges, Amara admitted, proceeding to explain the situation. Denise listened quietly before responding. You remember Mrs. Porter from church? She integrated the department store downtown back in 1968. She told me once that the day after she was hired, she found a note on her locker saying, "Go home, we don't want you here." You know what she did? What? Amara asked. She framed it. Kept it on her desk for 30 years until she retired as the store manager. Said it reminded her that change doesn't come without resistance. Amara smiled at the story. Thanks, Mama. Now, are you being too harsh? Maybe. Are you making this personal? Possibly. But sometimes justice needs a personal touch to get done right. Stand your ground, baby girl. After hanging up, Amara opened her desk drawer to find a folded piece of paper that hadn't been there the day before. Opening it revealed a crudely typed message, "You don't belong here." Instead of feeling threatened, she felt a strange sense of clarity. The anonymous note confirmed what she already knew, the problem was systemic and deeply entrenched. A knock at her door revealed Howard Jackson, the security officer who had intervened during the original confrontation. Got a minute, Chief Washington? He asked, glancing around to ensure they were alone. Of course, Howard. Come in. Howard closed the door carefully. I heard what's happening with Tyler and the others. Thought you should know they've got allies throughout the company. People are taking sides. I expected as much, Amara acknowledged. There's something else, Howard continued. A group of us, minority employees from different departments, we've been meeting informally, documenting incidents like what happened to you. We've got files going back years, but nobody would listen before. He placed a USB drive on her desk. Everything's here, dates, names, incidents. Most people were too afraid to file formal complaints, but they told us their stories. There are patterns, Chief Washington. Clear patterns of who gets promoted, who gets disciplined, who gets believed. Amara stared at the small device, understanding its significance. Why are you giving me this now? Because for the first time, someone with real authority might actually do something about it, Howard replied simply. Later that afternoon, Amara met privately with Julia in the CEO's office. The situation is escalating, Amara began without preamble. Tyler has filed a preemptive complaint, the board is receiving anonymous letters, and I've discovered that Thomas has been actively undermining the investigation. Julia sighed heavily. I know. 3 board members have already called me questioning your aggressive approach. One suggested we reconsider your appointment. And what did you tell them? Amara asked directly. That I stand by my choice, Julia replied. But Amara, I need to be honest, this company has deeper problems than I realized. What you've uncovered in 2 days suggests systematic issues that have been ignored or actively covered up for years. That's my assessment as well, Amara agreed, sliding Howard's USB drive across the desk. This contains documented incidents of discrimination from dozens of minority employees over the past 5 years. Most never filed formal complaints because they feared retaliation. Julia inserted the drive into her computer, scanning the files with growing concern. This is extensive. The question, Amara said carefully, is whether Skylink is genuinely committed to addressing these issues, even when it means confronting uncomfortable truths about our culture and leadership. Julia met her gaze steadily. I hired you because I wanted real change, not window dressing. I just didn't expect to face a full-scale cultural revolution in your first week. Neither did I, Amara admitted. But here we are. Here we are indeed, Julia agreed. So what's our next move? As they strategized late into the evening, Amara felt the weight of responsibility on her shoulders. This wasn't just about 3 discriminatory employees anymore. It was about transforming an entire corporate culture, a task that would require both courage and wisdom to navigate. The boardroom on the top floor of Skylink headquarters had hosted countless critical meetings throughout the company's history, but few as potentially transformative as today's disciplinary hearing. The long mahogany table was surrounded by executives, legal counsel, and HR representatives. The tension in the room was palpable as Amara prepared to present her findings. Tyler, Brandy, and Jake sat on one side, each with their own legal representation, a show of force that hadn't intimidated Amara but had certainly raised the stakes. Thomas Wilson sat nearby, ostensibly representing HR's interests but clearly aligned with the accused employees. Julia opened the proceedings with a brief statement about the company's commitment to fairness and thorough investigation before turning the floor over to Amara. Thank you all for being here, Amara began, her voice steady despite the hostile stares from across the table. Over the past week, my team has conducted a comprehensive investigation into the incident at the employee security checkpoint, as well as the broader pattern of behavior it represents. She activated the presentation screen, displaying a timeline of events supported by security footage, witness statements, and documentation. The evidence demonstrates conclusively that Mr. Reed, Ms. Cooper, and Mr. Simmons deliberately obstructed my access to the terminal despite valid identification, proper uniform, and legitimate purpose. This obstruction was not applied to white colleagues using the same entrance at the same time. Tyler's attorney immediately objected. My client maintains that he was following security protocols. There was no discriminatory intent. Intent is difficult to prove, Amara acknowledged. However, impact is measurable, and the disparate impact on minority employees is clearly demonstrated by the data. She transitioned to the next slide, showing statistical analysis of security checkpoint interactions over 6 months, broken down by race and gender. Minority employees were 3 times more likely to be delayed or questioned at checkpoints supervised by Mr. Reed. Female pilots specifically were 5 times more likely to have their credentials subjected to additional verification compared to their white male counterparts. As the presentation continued, Amara methodically dismantled each defense the employees had offered, supporting every point with documented evidence. The approach was clinical rather than emotional, focused on patterns rather than individual incidents. Furthermore, she continued, reaching the most damning section, our investigation revealed that Mr. Wilson systematically suppressed complaints against these employees and others engaging in similar discriminatory behavior. Thomas surged to his feet. That's an outrageous accusation. I've served this company faithfully for 20 years. Your service isn't in question, Amara replied calmly. Your handling of discrimination complaints is. She displayed a series of emails showing Thomas redirecting complaints about Tyler to alternative resolution channels that effectively buried them without action. Most concerning is this communication, she said, highlighting a specific email where Thomas advised Tyler to be more discreet in his scrutiny of minority staff rather than addressing the underlying behavior. The evidence was overwhelming, the conclusion inescapable. As Amara concluded her presentation, the room fell into stunned silence. Tyler was the first to break it, his composure finally cracking. 15 years, he said, his voice trembling with anger. I've given this company 15 years of loyal service. I've never had a single complaint on my record. Because they were systematically removed, Amara corrected him. Not because they didn't exist. Brandy, who had remained silent throughout the presentation, suddenly spoke up. I want to apologize, she said, her voice small but determined. I knew what we were doing was wrong, but I was afraid to speak up. Tyler made it clear that following his lead was the only way to advance. Tyler turned on her with fury. You little. That's enough, Julia interrupted sharply. Ms. Cooper, are you saying you were directed to discriminate against minority employees? Yes, Brandy admitted, avoiding Tyler's glare. Tyler said it was unofficial policy, that certain people needed extra scrutiny because they might be security risks or underqualified diversity hires. I should have questioned it, but I didn't. Jake, who had maintained a sullen silence until now, finally spoke. I was just doing what I was trained to do. Tyler said this was how things worked here. So you're claiming you were just following orders? Amara asked, her tone neutral but pointed. Jake shrugged uncomfortably. Yeah, I guess so. Tyler's attorney attempted to regain control of the narrative. My client categorically denies instructing others to discriminate. These allegations are clearly an attempt by junior employees to shift blame. But the coordinated defense had already crumbled. As the hearing continued, Tyler became increasingly hostile, Brandy increasingly remorseful, and Jake increasingly defensive. When it came time for final statements, Amara surprised everyone by shifting focus from the individuals to the system. What happened at that checkpoint wasn't an isolated incident, she stated firmly. It was the predictable outcome of a culture that has tolerated discrimination while claiming to value diversity. The employees before you today aren't the only ones responsible, but they are the ones who directly impacted flight operations and safety through their actions. She then presented the results of an anonymous company-wide survey conducted over the past week, showing that 63% of minority employees had experienced similar discrimination but only 12% had reported it due to fear of retaliation. As Chief of Operations, my recommendation isn't just about these three individuals. It's about setting a new standard for our company culture, Amara concluded. I therefore recommend termination for Mr. Reed, Ms. Cooper, and Mr. Simmons, and reassignment for Mr. Wilson pending further investigation into his handling of discrimination complaints. The board members exchanged glances, clearly divided on how to proceed. Some nodded in agreement with Amara's assessment, while others appeared hesitant about such decisive action. Julia called for a brief recess to allow the board to deliberate privately. As everyone filed out of the boardroom, Thomas approached Amara in the hallway. You've overplayed your hand, he warned quietly. The board won't support such extreme measures against long-term employees. We'll see, Amara replied, refusing to be intimidated. When the hearing reconvened 30 minutes later, Julia addressed the room with renewed authority. After reviewing all evidence and deliberating on Chief Washington's recommendations, the board has reached a decision, she announced. Tyler Reed, Brandy Cooper, and Jake Simmons will be terminated effective immediately for violations of company anti-discrimination policies and creating a hostile work environment." Tyler slammed his fist on the table. "This is outrageous. You'll be hearing from my attorney." "We already have," Julia replied coolly. "As for Mr. Wilson, he will be removed from his position as HR director and reassigned pending a thorough audit of all discrimination complaints filed during his tenure." As security personnel entered to escort the terminated employees from the building, Amara watched with mixed emotions. There was no joy in ending careers, even when justified. Yet there was unmistakable satisfaction in knowing that justice had finally been served, not just for her, but for countless others who had suffered in silence. Back in her office, Amara found dozens of handwritten notes slipped under her door, messages of gratitude and support from employees throughout the company. One in particular caught her attention, a simple card signed by Howard and 20 other security officers that read, "Thank you for seeing us." As she sat at her desk, contemplating the day's events, Amara felt both exhausted and energized. The confrontation had been necessary, but it was only the beginning of the real work ahead, transforming Skylink's culture from the inside out. 6 months after the termination hearing, Amara stood at the podium in Skylink's main training center, addressing the largest class of new pilot recruits in the company's history, and notably, its most diverse. The audience before her included faces of every color, gender, and background, all wearing the same eager expression she had once worn as a young pilot beginning her career. "Aviation isn't just about flying planes," she told them. "It's about creating connections, between cities, countries, and most importantly, between people. The strength of those connections depends on our ability to recognize and respect the unique perspective each of you brings to this company." The transformation of Skylink over the past 6 months had been remarkable, though not without challenges. New hiring practices implemented under Amara's leadership had increased diversity across all departments, not through lowered standards but through expanded recruitment channels and blind initial resume reviews that focused on qualifications rather than names or backgrounds. Mandatory bias training for all employees, from baggage handlers to board members, had changed everyday interactions in subtle but significant ways. The anonymous reporting system that had helped uncover the extent of discrimination now served as an early warning system, addressing issues before they escalated into larger problems. Perhaps most importantly, Amara had kept her promise to continue flying regularly, maintaining a connection with frontline operations rather than becoming isolated in the executive suite. This dual role allowed her to witness firsthand the impact of policy changes on daily operations and to model the leadership she expected from others. After the training session, Amara made her way to Gate C-22, where a special flight was preparing for departure, an Atlanta route staffed by an all-black female crew, from pilots to flight attendants. The historic flight had attracted media attention, with several news outlets covering the story as a symbol of progress in an industry historically dominated by white men. As Amara greeted the flight crew, she spotted a familiar face among the waiting passengers, her mother, Denise, who had been invited as a special guest for the inaugural flight. "Look at you," Denise beamed, embracing her daughter. "When you were watching those planes from our rooftop, did you ever imagine this?" "Not even in my wildest dreams," Amara admitted. "But it's still just the beginning." Later that evening, Amara attended the company's diversity gala, where her mother was being honored alongside other family members who had supported pioneering employees through their challenges. The event symbolized Skylink's new commitment to recognizing not just individual achievement but the support systems that made it possible. During a quiet moment, Julia approached Amara with a glass of champagne. The lawsuit was dismissed, she informed her with satisfied smile. Tyler's claims of reverse discrimination fell apart under scrutiny. The evidence was simply too overwhelming. "And Thomas?" Amara asked. "Resigned last week rather than adapt to the new expectations," Julia replied. "Some people can't change, even when given the opportunity." Across the room, Amara spotted Howard Jackson, now head of security, implementing the fairer protocols he had helped design. Under his leadership, security checkpoints had become models of efficiency and respect, treating all employees with equal professionalism regardless of appearance. The gala's keynote speaker, a pioneering black female aviator from the 1960s, brought the audience to tears with stories of barriers overcome and doors opened for future generations. As Amara listened, she reflected on her own journey and the countless others who had faced similar obstacles. The following week, during a routine flight to San Francisco, Amara experienced a moment that crystallized the meaning of all her efforts. While walking through the terminal in her captain's uniform, she noticed a young black girl, perhaps 8 or 9 years old, watching her with wide-eyed wonder. The girl's mother nudged her forward encouragingly. "Go ahead, ask her." The girl approached Amara shyly. "Excuse me, ma'am. I want to be a pilot like you when I grow up. Do you think I can do it?" Amara knelt to meet the girl's eyes. "What's your name?" "Zoe," the girl replied. "Well, Zoe, not only can you do it, but by the time you're ready to fly, there will be many more pilots who look like us. And they'll all be ready to help you succeed, just like I am." She unpinned her junior wings, the small pins given to children interested in aviation, and attached it to Zoe's shirt. "This is your first official pilot accessory. Keep it until you get your real wings." The girl's face lit up with a smile that made all the struggles worthwhile. Back at headquarters the next day, Amara received a report from Julia showing improved employee satisfaction scores across all demographics, with particularly significant improvements among minority staff. The company's reputation had also benefited, with applications increasing by 43% and customer satisfaction ratings reaching all-time highs. "The board is impressed," Julia noted. "What seemed like a crisis 6 months ago has become a case study in positive transformation." "It wasn't without cost," Amara acknowledged, thinking of the sleepless nights, the stress, and the personal attacks she had weathered. "True leadership rarely is," Julia replied. "But the question is always whether the cost was worth the outcome." On her way home that evening, Amara took a detour to the employee entrance where the confrontation with Tyler, Brandy, and Jake had occurred. The security station was now staffed by a diverse team who greeted her with genuine respect rather than reluctant compliance. As she showed her ID, a formality she still observed despite her position, Amara noticed a new face being trained at the checkpoint. "This is our new security protocol," the trainer was explaining. "Every employee deserves the same level of respect and efficiency, regardless of appearance, position, or background." The circle had closed. The incident that could have broken her spirit had instead become the catalyst for systemic change. The 3 employees who had tried to block her path had inadvertently opened doors for countless others. In her office, Amara kept a photo on her desk. Not of the confrontation or the termination notices, but of herself mentoring a diverse group of pilot trainees. It served as a daily reminder that true victory wasn't in punishment but in transformation, creating a future where talent and dedication determine success, not appearance or background. The next generation of aviation professionals would still face challenges, but they would face them in a company culture that valued them as individuals rather than judging them by stereotypes. And for Amara Washington, that was the most meaningful achievement of all. Have you ever witnessed someone turn a negative experience into positive change? What would you have done in Amara's position? Comment below with your thoughts on how discrimination should be addressed in the workplace. Like this video if you believe in standing up for what's right, subscribe for more inspiring stories of justice and transformation, and share this with someone who needs to hear that change is possible when brave people take a stand. Thank you for joining me on this journey of courage and transformation. Until next time, remember that your voice matters, your experiences are valid, and your courage can change systems. This powerful story of Captain Amara Washington reminds us that systemic change requires both courage and authority. When faced with discrimination, Amara didn't just seek personal vindication, she used her position to transform an entire corporate culture. The story teaches us that true leadership means addressing root causes, not just symptoms. It shows how documenting patterns of behavior creates undeniable evidence that can overcome resistance to change. We learn that allies are essential in any fight against discrimination. From Howard, who intervened, to Julia, who provided institutional support, to Amara's mother, who offered emotional strength. The story demonstrates that accountability isn't about revenge, but about creating safe, equitable environments where everyone can thrive based on merit rather than privilege. Perhaps most importantly, this narrative illustrates how representation matters. When Amara knelt before young Zoe, promising her a future with more pilots who looked like them, she completed the circle of progress, from being blocked to opening doors for generations to come. Have you ever witnessed discrimination in your workplace? Or perhaps you've been the person who stood up against unfair treatment. Share your experiences in the comments below. Your story might give someone else the courage they need. If Captain Washington's journey resonated with you, hit that like button to help more people discover this important message. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories about overcoming injustice and creating meaningful change in our communities. Don't keep this message to yourself. Share this video with someone who's fighting their own battles against discrimination, or with leaders who have the power to transform their organizations. Together, we can create workplaces where talent and dedication determine success, not appearance or background. Thank you for joining us on this journey of courage and transformation. Until next time, remember that your voice matters, your experiences are valid, and one person's courage can indeed change entire systems.